If this teaching that is involved in this meditation practice, if the teaching that goes along with this meditation practice is telling us that there is this possibility for happiness, there's this possibility for experiencing peace and well-being and happiness and contentment. The teachings that are called the wisdom teachings tell us that this possibility is a real possibility and that every human being has this possibility. Every human being has the opportunity to be happy, live in peace, and experience contentment. Every human being has this possibility, but this is not the common experience that human beings are having. So if you are familiar with the teaching and you understand the teaching, and the teaching tells you to take a look, the teaching literally says, look and ask yourself, who am I? The teaching literally says that. Look and ask yourself, who am I? Why? Because this will be the beginning of a process of discovering what's between you and having the experience of well-being. It'll allow you to discover what's between you and having the experience of well-being. So what is it that's between you and having the experience of well-being? What's happening when you're suffering is another way of saying the same thing, right? Because most human beings are suffering. According to what the Buddha said, that life is suffering for most of humanity because most of humanity does not experience the truth. Most of humanity is experiencing a condition, not the truth. The condition that most of humanity is experiencing is the condition of taking ourselves to be the body and the condition of taking ourselves to be the personality. And this goes unquestioned. You know, people are not walking around asking, who am I? And the reason that people are not asking, who am I, is because almost all of humanity considers that question to have been answered, don't they? Yeah. It's not a question. For most of humanity, that's not a question, because very early on in life, when we're too small and too ignorant to know any better, right, we're given the identity that we take to be real. When we're too small and too ignorant to know any better, we're given the identity that we take to be real by people. We're given that identity by people who were given that identity when they were too small to know any better. Right? And because the identity happens so early on, when you're a child, you don't have any alternative. When you're a child, you come into this world, and part of what happens when you come into this world is that you're told by the people that were here before you, they're going to tell you what's going on. That's what that. The people that were here before you are going to tell you what's going on, and they're going to tell you who you are, and they're going to tell you what's going on and tell you who you are based on what they consider to be the truth. So they're going to tell you that you're a physical body just like I am. You're a personality just like I am. Right? And so that happens very early on. And by the time we go to school, we're already being the body and the personality, trying to be happy. The process has already started. We're being the personality and the body, trying to be happy. And one of the things that gets communicated to us very early on, before we know any better, is that happiness is a function of getting what you want. That's very early on. If you look at a very small child, they're already playing the getting what you want game, aren't they?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, when the terrible twos, right? When a terrible twos comes, right? The child says, this is mine. You can't have it, this is mine, right? So they're already indoctrinated into the idea that what you possess, what you have, what's yours makes you happy. And the more you have of what's yours, the happier you'll be. So life is about getting more, getting more. How do you get more? Well, you go to school and you learn how to be smart. You learn how to think, right? You learn how to think. And when you learn how to think, you're using your mind to think. This is what we're taught when we're children. Learn how to think. Using your mind to think. And when you use your mind to think, what does that mean? It means you are thinking, right? If you're using your mind to think, it means you are thinking. And if you are thinking, it means the voice in your head is you, right? And so we get indoctrinated to that very early on, right? If you look, can you remember when it began to be the case that you took the voice in your head to be you? You can't even remember it. It happened so much, it was so much of the process that went on, that you took this on, that you can't even remember when it started. Right? But somewhere very early on, you started to be under the impression that this voice in your head was you thinking. Not only were you under the impression that this voice in your head was you thinking, but much worse than that, you were under the impression that your thoughts were facts. Wasn't that the case? As crazy as that sounds, because the evidence is not hard to see that my thoughts can't be facts, because my thoughts are interpretations based on my unique conditioning, which is my unique experiences that I had and learned what I learned. And the evidence is pretty clear that if you were born in Russia and you learned to speak Russian, that you would have a view of the world and a view of yourself from that indoctrination, from that situation, right? And so it's not hard to see that the evidence is very clear that what I think and what you think are very different, right? And what you think and I think are not the truth. They're an interpretation of reality based on where we were born, who our parents were, what language we speak, right? And what we were told is reality when we were a child. And we just took that on board, that that's reality. And we start to function in the world with this assumption that that's reality without questioning it. So if somebody asks an adult, who are you, right? If somebody asks an adult, who are you, right? Two things happen, right? The first thing that happens is they realize that this isn't something that they have entertained very often in their life, if at all, right? It's not something that nobody asks you very much in your life, because everybody takes it that they already know the answer to the question, right? So if somebody asks you, who are you, right? You find yourself answering the question by looking to see what the thoughts are that tell you the answer, because you believe your thoughts. You believe your thoughts are facts. You believe your thoughts are the truth. So if somebody asks you who you are, you tell them what the thoughts say you are. So what do you tell them if they ask you who you are? You'll tell them who they told you you were. That's who you'll tell people you are. You'll tell them who they told you you were when you were a child, right? You'll say, oh, well, I'm this body, right? You'll say, I'm this body. If you look, you'll say, I'm this body. What am I? What else am I, right? I'm my name. I'm my personality, right? And then you talk about the roles that you play in life. I'm somebody's father. I do this job and so forth, right? But it doesn't take much at all to look at those answers and come to the understanding or the realization that they can't possibly be true. That you are who you think you are, that you are your body. Even that one thing, that you are your body, even though we operate as if it's true that we are our body, right? We talk about our age, right, as our body's age. That's how old I am, right? If you ask me how old I am, I tell you how old my body is, right? Right? So we take our body to be ourselves, but we really know it's not true. We really know it's not true because you look in the mirror at your body, and when you look in the mirror at your body, you have thoughts about it, you have judgments about it. You know, you see it like you're looking at this thing in the mirror, this flesh bag, you're looking at it in the mirror, right? And you have this recognition that it's my body. You see, you relate to it like it's my body. So on a certain level, you know it's not you, right? But at the same time, you've taken on the identity that that is you. So when we relate to each other about our body, we confuse it or we talk about it as if that's what we are. You know, I am my body. I am my personality. Right? So when we start to do an investigation in terms of looking at what's going on here, what is happening in a human life, right? We come to see, if we look at it, we come to see that we're experiencing this experience that's called suffering. And if we examine what this suffering is, it is a process in which the thought activity is continually analyzing what's going on, right? It's continually interpreting what's going on, right? And part of that interpretation includes whether it's what should be going on. We never slow down long enough to look at this process. But the thought process is a thought process in which what's happening is constantly being interpreted and analyzed in terms of, is it right? Is it wrong? Should it be what's going on? Right? Or should it not be what's going on, right? And we live on the other side of the interpretation, don't we? Yeah, we live on the other side of the interpretation, that if, and so the source of human suffering is not hard to see if you slow down and look at it, right? The source of human suffering is that we have this voice in our head that's constantly talking to us about what's going on and telling us whether it's right or wrong, good or bad, whether it should be going on or it shouldn't be going on. And when it's telling us that it's wrong and it shouldn't be going on, what happens? We get upset. We get upset. I don't like it. This should be different. One of the most profound statements you could possibly encounter in your life, right, is that the way things are is never different. Look at this. One of the most profound statements you could encounter in your life is that the way things are is never different. And yet, the state of mind or the condition that we live our lives in is that it should be different a lot of the time. We wake up in the morning, if it's gloomy and if it's raining, right? And we have this reaction to it, oh, it's raining. I didn't want it to be raining. I wanted it to be sunny, right? So already I'm in this state of discontent. I'm already not content. And if you examine this, it's not all that hard to see that if the source of suffering has to do with the voice in your head that's constantly telling you, we call that thinking, that's constantly telling you how things should be, right? And when they're not the way they should be, it's telling you should do something about that, isn't it? You should say something about that. You should do something about that. You should change it to make it the way you want it, right? And so we spend as much energy as possible trying to change the things that aren't the way we want them to be the way we want them to be. We do that by getting rid of the people in our lives that aren't the way we want them to be. Except for our family, we can't get rid of them. We just put up with them, right? But we can get rid of them in terms of not relating to them, right? So, and if you really examine all this, right, and I'm talking about this from a psychological perspective because your life is a psychological life. A human life is a psychological life, right? What is a psychological life? It's a life that's happening in your mind. That's psychological, happening in your mind. In your mind, you take it to be that you're your body, you take it to be that you're the personality, and as that identity, you're attempting to be in the world, dealing with what's happening all the time. But because of the fact that a lot of the time what's happening is not what you want to happen, not what should be happening, right? That you're in conflict with it, so you resist it, you struggle with it, you fight with it, and that's called suffering, right? So you're suffering. And if you just look at this, what you can see if you just look at this, right, is what would solve the problem of suffering. If the cause of suffering is thinking that things should be different than they are, and they're never different, then the solution to the problem would be to accept things as they are, right? But the problem with that is the voice in your head just doesn't accept things the way they are. It's always comparing things to the way that it should be. And what is it using to do that? It's using what's not happening to do that, isn't it? If you're comparing what's happening to the way it should be, you must be imagining another way, right? You must be thinking about another way that it should be that it's not, right? So you're spending time with what's not happening, called your imagination, right? And you're imagining what you want, how you want things to be. That's the future, so you're imagining that. You're imagining how they used to be that you didn't like. That's the past. And in the present, you're trying to use the future and the past to get this to be what you want. And that's the way we're living our life all the time. So, but if the solution to not suffering is to simply allow things to be the way they are, the first thing that you will notice is that that just isn't happening. Why isn't it happening? Because who you take yourself to be is a conceptual reality that exists in your thought process, a conceptual reality that exists in your thought process. And who you take yourself to be is the one who knows. That's who you take yourself to be, the one who knows. Not the one that just has information, but the one who knows. The information you have, you consider to be facts, isn't it? Even if you know, even if you examine it and you know the truth is that the thoughts that occur in your mind are not facts. They're not the truth, they're interpretations based on your past experience, right? Even if you know that's the case, right, and that's causing you to suffer, even if you know that, right, it still plays and you still pay attention to it. It still plays and you still pay attention to it. So how do you get out of it? You can understand, you can intellectually understand, what's wrong in terms of the suffering is happening because I expect things to be different and it never is different. You can see that, right? So how do I get myself to be related to the way things are in this state that I'm not resisting it anymore, that I'm not that I'm not struggling with it anymore, right? I can't do that as long as I am using my way of relating to what's happening to be my mental activity. I can't do that. I can't accept the way things are as long as I am using my mental activity to be the source of my understanding about what's happening. I can't accept the way things are, right? Because the mental activity is always comparing the way it is to some imaginary possibility, right? And that's the nature of the mind, that's the nature of the brain, right? So the only way to get out of that is to stop paying attention to that process, right? But we can't stop paying attention to that process because we have learned that we're the thinker. Very early on, we learn that we're the thinker, so I can't stop paying attention to that process because that process is me thinking. Do you see what I'm getting at here? You can't get away from this process of me thinking, and it just happens by itself, and I identify with it, so I take it to be me that's doing the thinking. And it ends me up suffering in terms of either in depression or anxiety or fear, discontent with life, because life just won't conform to my way of being. It just won't conform to my personality. So, thousands of years ago, people started to recognize that there was a problem here, right? And they started to slow down and pay close attention to exactly what the problem is. And they realized that as long as you take yourself to be the body and the personality, you must suffer because you're taking yourself to be something that isn't real, that doesn't exist, right? That is in conflict with what's happening most of the time. That's called the mental state. That's called the thinking activity or thought process, right? So if you go to psychotherapy, what are they going to do? They're going to work with you to look at your thought processes and see how your thought processes don't work. And then have you examine your thinking and talk to you about how you can change the way you think, right? To a better way to think, right? Change the voice in your head to a better voice in your head, right? But that still doesn't work because the changes you're making are within the system, and the system is what's not working. The changes you're making are within the system, and it's the system that doesn't work. It's like Einstein said, you can't fix something that's not working in a system within the system. You have to get out of the system to fix the system that's not working, right? Well, you are the system. The personality is the system, right? That's not working, right? So the only way that you can get free from that, it's like they say in the Buddhist teachings, these teachings aren't for freedom for you, these teachings are for freedom from you. from who you take yourself to be, because as long as you're in the form you take yourself to be, you must suffer. Why? Because that's not the truth. You are not your personality. That's a concept. That's a self-concept. And that personality plays out in the voice in your head. You're literally living your life in your head, right? So what did they come up with thousands of years ago when they saw what the problem was? They came up with sit still, be quiet. There's this thing called attention that they noticed, that you could direct attention to things. Sit still, be quiet, move this attention away from the thinking activity and pay attention to the breath. And we're only using the breath as a place to anchor the attention. There's nothing special about it. You could pay attention to anything to anchor your attention. You could look at a candle, right? You could use a mantra to just keep repeating something in your mind to keep your mind occupied so it can't get into trouble, right? But we're using the breath in Zen meditation. We're using being aware of the body breathing and moving attention away from this thought process, right? Moving attention away from this voice in the head that we've identified ourselves with that isn't really what we are. I mean, if you pay attention to it, you can see that you're not the voice in your head. It is not you speaking. It has its own system that it's using to speak, okay? So if we move attention away from that and we're paying attention to the body breathing, when we move our attention away from that, the possibility comes into existence that what we are is awareness itself instead of the personality. That possibility comes into existence. Because if I move my attention away from the thinking activity, right, then what am I left with? There's no interpretation going on anymore. If I move my attention away from the thought process, there's no interpretation going on anymore. All there is this experience of consciousness or awareness. And that experience of consciousness and awareness would probably have been being ignored until the first time that I looked at it. Probably will have been being ignored. It was always there, but it was being used by the person. Now watch. The awareness that is your true nature was always there, but it was being used by the personality. It was being used by the system called the personality so that the personality could take itself to be real. Do you understand? So the reason that you believe that your personality is real because you believe that your personality is alive, right? Oh, I'm alive, you know, my personality is alive. No, it's not alive. Your personality is a concept. A concept can't be alive. A concept is a thought activity, right? So the personality is using what is alive, right? It does exist, right? But it's saying that that which is alive is the personality, right? Which is not the case. And when you practice meditation, you're moving your attention away from the system that's telling you that you're something that you're not, and you can begin, maybe for the first time in your life, to experience the reality of what you are, which we call consciousness or awareness. And one of the things about that reality that is the truth of what we are, that doesn't have a form, that's not a body, that has no age, right? One of the things about that is that it's free to experience an experience of being related to what's happening without any conflict. The natural state, the unconditioned state, the state of awareness, right, just is, and the isness of it relating to what's happening never has a problem. The awareness as the isness that it is, it just is. It's not thinking. Awareness does not think. So when you practice meditation, you're gradually over time developing, by paying attention to awareness itself, you're developing an experience of a natural state that is always the same. It never changes, and it's always content. It doesn't need anything. It doesn't want anything. It didn't come from anywhere. And this occurs to you as a difference as you're practicing meditation. This occurs to you as something that feels different. than it feels when you're thinking. Feels different than it feels when you're identified with the body and you're identified with the personality. How does it feel different? It feels like it's more spacious. It feels like it's unlimited. It feels like it's free. It feels like it's unaffected by anything. Right? So through practicing meditation, this experience of what's actually what we are, the natural state, right, starts to exist and get stronger. It starts to exist and get stronger. And as it starts to exist and get stronger, you start to experience being content and being happy and being satisfied. Because when you're experiencing your true nature, you recognize the fact that if I rely on my thinking to determine, how happy I am, I'm going to suffer. Okay? So what happens is gradually over time through the practice of meditation, the experience of your true nature starts to come on board, starts to be real for you. Right? And you start to experience the possibility of being peaceful, content, and happy. It's called the natural state.